The telegram sat on the parlor table like an accusation, and Lavinia Goddard was not supposed to have seen it at all. She'd come downstairs for a glass of water. It was past midnight, Virginia summer thick and airless, and there it was, open beside her brother-in-law's pipe, the words already burned into her memory before she even realized she was reading. Response received. Royce Danning, Pioche, Nevada. Prepared to offer passage. Awaiting confirmation. Lavinia stood in the dark parlor for a long time. She knew her sister Millicent had been worried. She knew Hugh Price had been making comments at supper, careful comments, wrapped in concern, about how a woman of 26 with no prospects was a burden no household could carry indefinitely. She knew, too, that she had made herself inconvenient in 100 small ways. Correcting Hugh's arithmetic when he read aloud from the papers, pointing out errors in his business letters, spending the housekeeping money on books instead of hat trimmings. What she hadn't known was that he'd done something about it. She set the water glass down without drinking from it and went back upstairs. She lay on her narrow bed in the room that had been the sewing room before she arrived, and she stared at the ceiling, and she thought. By morning, she had made her decision. Hugh was already at the breakfast table when she came down, and something in his face, a flicker of guilt behind practiced pleasantness, told her he hadn't expected her to be smiling. "I'll need my train fare," she said, sitting across from him and reaching for the coffee pot, "and the address in Pioche." The silence that followed lasted so long that Millicent, coming in from the kitchen with the biscuits, looked between them and stopped walking. "Lavinia," Hugh started. "You placed the advertisement," she said. Someone responded, "I intend to go." She poured her coffee with a steady hand. "Unless you'd like to explain to me why a woman who can run your household accounts, teach your children Latin, and outsmart your business partners isn't worth the price of a train ticket west." Hugh's jaw worked. "Vinny," Millicent said softly, "you don't know anything about him. I know his name. I know he has a mine. I know he wrote back." Lavinia looked at her sister, this beautiful, well-married woman who had always pitied her with great kindness. "What exactly am I staying for?" No one answered, because no one could. The train from Richmond to Nevada Territory took 6 days. Lavinia spent them in a state of precise, deliberate calm that she privately suspected was not calm at all, but simply shock wearing a sensible dress. She read every book she'd packed. She did arithmetic in the margins. She talked to no one except a railroad conductor named Bill, who had the good sense to tell her that Pioche was the roughest mining town in Nevada, and the worst sense to expect this to discourage her. "Good," she said. "I'm not easily discouraged." Bill looked at her carpet bag and her ink-stained fingers and her expression, and did not argue. Pioche was a revelation. Not a pleasant one, not at first. It was built into the side of a mountain like something that had clawed its way out of the earth and was still deciding whether to stay. Wooden buildings hung at strange angles on the hillside. Men with silver dust on their boots walked 3 across on streets that hadn't been designed for 3. Somewhere above the town, the stamp mills ran day and night, shaking the ground like a second heartbeat. Lavinia stood on the platform with her trunk and looked up at the mountain and thought, "Good, something that takes this much work to build is something worth fighting for." Royce Danning was already there. She knew him before she'd consciously registered any detail, just something in the way he stood apart from the crowd, arms crossed, watching the passengers disembark with the measuring look of a man who has been disappointed enough times to stop pretending he isn't checking. He was tall, dark-haired, maybe 35, with the kind of face that had started out severe and then been weathered into something close to stone. A sheriff's badge, old and scratched, still worn on his coat, not from habit, she'd learn later, but because he hadn't gotten around to putting it anywhere else. Their eyes met across the platform, and neither of them looked away. "Miss Goddard," his voice was flat, direct, no warmth, but no cruelty either. "Mr. Danning." She walked to him, because she had not come all this way to wait for anyone to come to her. "I assume you're wondering whether you made a mistake." Something shifted in his expression. "Are you going to tell me I did?" "No, but you should know that whoever wrote that advertisement wasn't me, and whatever it said, I can't guarantee it's accurate." He studied her for a long moment. Then he picked up her trunk like it weighed nothing. "Wagon's this way." Pioche spread itself below them as they climbed toward the Danning mine. Royce drove and said little. Lavinia asked questions, and he answered them with the minimum required. How many men worked the mine? What the silver yield had been last quarter? How far to the nearest doctor? She filed each answer away. "You're not what I expected," he said finally. "What did you expect?" "Someone quieter." "Is that a complaint?" He looked at her sideways. The corners of his mouth didn't quite move. Not yet. The house was built into a cut in the hillside, 2 stories, solid stone foundation, the kind of construction that said whoever built it intended to be there a long time. Clean but hollow. Swept floors, bare windows, the feeling of a place where someone had been very careful to remove all evidence of living. A boy appeared in the doorway before the wagon had fully stopped. 9 years old, dark hair like his father's, suspicious eyes fixed on Lavinia, with the frank assessment of someone who has been burned before and learned to check. "Is she staying?" he asked Royce. Ned. Royce's voice had changed entirely, still spare but different in texture. "This is Miss Goddard." Lavinia climbed down before either of them could offer to help her, because she'd been managing on her own long enough that being helped felt like something she had to earn before she'd accept it. She looked at the boy straight on. "I'm not here to replace anyone," she said. "I'm here to help. If you decide I'm not helping, you can tell me, and I'll take it seriously." Ned stared at her. "Pa says you're going to be our housekeeper." "Your father said I'd be his wife, which out here amounts to more than keeping house." She straightened up. "What's the worst thing about this house right now?" A long pause, then cautiously, "The stove. It only works half the time and Pa burns everything." "Then show me the stove." He showed her. That night, after a dinner that didn't burn, Ned ate 2 helpings without being asked. The arrangement was what they'd agreed, which is to say nothing had been agreed at all. What existed was a practical silence on both sides, separate rooms, mutual respect, a household that needed running and a woman who could run it. Royce was out before dawn most days, back after dark, eating whatever she left warming on the stove. He said thank you with the careful precision of a man who'd learned that courtesy costs nothing and pays considerable dividends. He did not ask her why she'd really come, and she didn't volunteer it. It was Dolores Vega who told her the truth about the town. Dolores ran the only laundry in Pioche that didn't lose your shirts, and she had been watching everything that happened here for 11 years, with the composed attention of someone who had long since decided that human nature was fascinating rather than disappointing. She showed up at the Danning house 3 days after Lavinia arrived, ostensibly to return a shirt from the last batch, actually to assess the situation. "They're talking about you," Dolores said, sitting at Lavinia's kitchen table with the ease of someone who had never needed an invitation. "The mine wives. They say Royce must have been desperate to send for a woman like you." "A woman like me," Lavinia repeated. Sharp tongue, no looks to speak of, too educated to be manageable. Dolores set down her coffee cup. "Their words, I'm reporting, not endorsing." "What do you think?" "I think Royce Danning has been running this mine alone for 3 years since his wife died. And the books are a disaster, and half his men are being systematically robbed in ways too small to prove but too consistent to be accidents." She met Lavinia's eyes. "And I think you noticed the same thing I did when you looked at the ledgers he left on the table last night." Lavinia had noticed. She'd also assumed it wasn't her place to say anything yet. She was revising that assumption. "Whose men?" she asked. "That's the question." Dolores refilled her own coffee. "My guess is it starts with your brother-in-law." The name landed like a stone in still water. She'd told no one about Hugh, but Dolores had a cousin who worked the Virginia rail line and a memory like a steel trap and a talent for connecting things that other people filed separately. "He's been buying up supply contracts for Pioche mines," Dolores said, "through a freight company out of Salt Lake. The margins he charges are—" "Usurious," Lavinia said. "I was going to say illegal, but yes." "Royce doesn't know." "Royce knows the numbers don't add up. He doesn't know why." Dolores looked at her steadily. "He does now." That night, after Ned was asleep, Lavinia sat down at the kitchen table with the ledgers and a lamp and didn't move for 4 hours. When Royce came in at midnight, she had 3 pages of notes and a headache that felt earned. He stood in the doorway, covered in rock dust, and looked at the papers spread across his table, and something behind his eyes went very still. "You went through my books," he said. "You left them on the table." She looked up. "Do you want me to stop, or do you want to know what I found?" A long silence. The lamp guttered in a draft from the open door. "What did you find?" he said. She told him. She told him about the freight contracts overcharged by 19%, systematically, always just under the threshold that would trigger a formal audit. She told him about the supply invoices with dates that didn't match the delivery logs. She told him about the pattern, the careful, practiced pattern of someone bleeding a mine slowly enough that the wound didn't show until you were already too weak to fight back. She did not yet tell him about Hugh. She needed to be certain first. Royce sat down across from her. He didn't speak for a while. When he did, his voice was quiet. How do you know all this? My father was a school teacher who kept meticulous records and died without a cent because he trusted the wrong man with his school's finances. She looked at the papers. I learned to read ledgers the way some women learn to read people's faces, early and out of necessity. He studied her across the lamplight, not the measuring look from the platform, but something different. The look of a man who has been wrong about something important and is just beginning to understand how wrong. Go to sleep, he said, not unkindly. We'll start again in the morning. The letter from Hugh arrived 6 weeks after Lavinia did. It was addressed to Royce, which told her Hugh had done his research and was choosing to approach the man rather than the woman because he'd made the mistake of thinking that was the smarter move. She read it before Royce came home, not because she didn't trust Royce, but because she needed to understand the full shape of the threat before having to watch someone else react to it. Hugh was offering to buy the Danning mine at a price that was, on its face, reasonable. Underneath the reasonable price was the clear implication of the alternative. The freight contracts could be restructured, the supply chains rerouted, the credit extended to the mine's equipment suppliers called in. None of it stated outright, all of it entirely clear. Lavinia set the letter down. Then she went to find Dolores. Dolores listened without interrupting, which Lavinia had come to understand meant she found the situation serious. When it was done, Dolores was quiet for a moment. Then, how much do you need and how fast? I need the original freight contracts, the ones before Hugh's company took over, and I need someone who can file a fraud claim in Carson City without his people knowing until it's too late to suppress. The original contracts are in the county land office. I know the clerk. Dolores stood. And my nephew is an attorney in Carson City who has been waiting 2 years to take this particular network apart in a courtroom. She looked at Lavinia. You're sure about your brother-in-law? His signature is on the original amendment to the freight terms. He signed as a business consultant. He visited Pioche 14 months ago, which is precisely when the overcharges began. Lavinia held her gaze. I'm sure. Does Royce know? Not yet. You're going to have to tell him. I know. She told him that night. She laid out everything. The fraud, the contracts, Hugh's letter, her own connection to the man behind it. She watched Royce's face move through something complicated and controlled, the way faces do when a person is deciding whether to be angry at the right target or the easiest one. He sent you here, Royce said. His voice was very level. He sent me here as a way to solve a problem, she said. I came here as a choice. She held his gaze. Those are different things, and if you can't see the difference right now, I understand. But I'm not leaving, and I'm not stopping what I've started. Something moved in Royce's expression. Not quite the wall she'd been watching for weeks, something behind it, something that had been very still and was beginning, cautiously, to shift. You could have told me from the beginning, he said. I needed to be certain first. I needed you to see what I could do before you heard where I came from, because if you'd known about Hugh at the start, you might have sent me back. She said it simply, without apology. I wasn't willing to be sent back. A long silence. The fire settled in the stove. He tried to take this mine, Royce said at last, and instead he sent me the person who's going to save it. That's one way to look at it. It's the accurate way. He moved to the window, looked out at the dark mountain. When he turned back, his expression had changed, still spare, but open in a way she hadn't seen before, like a door that had been shut a long time and was considering the option of not being. My wife, Eleanor. She hated it here. I knew it and kept telling myself she'd adjust, that the mine would turn a profit and things would get easier. He stopped. By the time I admitted it wasn't getting better, she was already gone. Lavinia waited. I don't know how to do this right, he said. I thought I was offering you a business arrangement, something practical. He looked at her. I didn't expect to want more than that. Neither did I, she said honestly. He crossed the room. He stopped close enough that she could see the silver dust, still caught in the lines around his eyes, and the way he looked at her. Not the measuring look from the platform, but the look of a person who has decided to stop being careful. I'm going to ask you to stay, he said, not because of the mine, not because of Ned, because of you, Lavinia. Because you walked into this house and saw everything that was broken and started fixing it without asking permission, and I have never in my life been so grateful for a quality that I spent years thinking was a flaw. She didn't answer in words. She didn't need to. The fraud case took 3 months to work through the Nevada courts. Dolores's nephew was as capable as advertised. The original freight contracts contradicted the amended terms so cleanly that the judge called it the least complicated fraud he'd seen in 15 years on the bench, which was not a compliment to the men who'd constructed it. Hugh, when confronted with the evidence, did what men of his particular type always did when caught. He made it someone else's fault. He blamed the freight company. He blamed Lavinia. He wrote to Royce that he had only been trying to look after his sister-in-law's interests by ensuring she was settled somewhere, that someone would take care of her. Lavinia read the letter and set it in the kitchen stove. Millicent wrote separately. Her letter was short and made no excuses, which Lavinia respected more than she expected to. It said only, "I can see from your last letter that you have become someone I would like to know better. If you're ever willing to have a visitor, I would like to come." Lavinia wrote back, "Come in spring when the desert is blooming. Bring sensible shoes." The day the court ruled in Royce's favor, Ned was waiting on the porch when they came home. He'd been told to stay at Dolores's, but he hadn't stayed because he was 9 years old and the outcome of this case was more important to him than instructions. "Did we win?" he asked. "We won," Royce said. Ned looked at Lavinia for a long moment with those serious gray eyes. Then he crossed the porch and put his arms around her middle, and she held him, and neither of them said anything, because some things don't need language. That night, after Ned was in bed and the house was quiet, Royce found Lavinia in the small room she'd claimed for herself. A shelf of books, a desk where she worked by lamplight. He stood in the doorway the same way she'd seen him stand at the mine entrance. Present, attentive, slightly uncertain about his welcome. "Come in," she said. He sat on the edge of the desk, which was not technically a chair, but Royce Danning was not a man who operated within the strict parameters of furniture design. "I keep trying to figure out how to say something," he said, "and I keep getting it wrong in my head." "Try anyway." "When Eleanor died, I decided that was the price of wanting something too much. That wanting made you careless, and careless cost you everything." He looked at his hands. "And then you showed up on that platform, looking like you'd fight the whole town if they gave you cause, and I thought, that woman is going to be nothing but trouble." "You were right," Lavinia said. "I know." The corner of his mouth moved. "Turns out trouble was what I needed." He looked at her. "I love you, Lavinia. I didn't plan on it. I don't entirely know what to do with it, but I'd rather you know." She set down her pen. "I love you too," she said. "I didn't plan on it either. I came out here to stop being invisible, not to fall in love with someone who makes me feel like the most visible person in any room." She looked at him steadily. "But here we are." Spring came to Pioche with a particular kind of violence, everything blooming too fast, too bright, after the long gray winter. Millicent arrived on a Thursday in April, stepping off the train in shoes that were not quite sensible enough, but better than expected, looking around at the mountain town, with an expression that moved rapidly through alarm into something more complicated. She stayed 2 weeks. She watched her sister run a household and a set of mine accounts and an informal classroom of miners' children who had started asking Lavinia to come teach them twice a week because, as their unofficial spokesperson put it, she explained things so that they actually made sense. She watched Ned call Lavinia Ma at the supper table, casually, as if this had always been true. She watched Royce Danning look at her sister the way that very few people had ever looked at Lavinia Goddard. On her last night, Millicent sat with Lavinia on the porch, while the stamp mills ran their steady percussion on the mountain above them. "I owe you an apology," Millicent said, not preamble, just the truth stated plainly. "You do?" "I knew what Hugh was going to do, not the fraud. I didn't know about that, but the advertisement." She looked at her hands. "I told myself it was practical, that you needed to be settled, that it was unkind to leave you in a household where you weren't valued." A long pause. "I didn't ask whether you wanted to leave. I just decided you did and helped arrange the exit." "You were right that I wanted to leave," Lavinia said. "You were wrong to decide it for me." "Yes," a silence. "You're different here." "I'm not different. I'm the same as I always was." Lavinia looked out at the dark mountain, at the lights of the mine, at the place she had built herself into by sheer insistence. "I just finally have room to be it." Millicent left in the morning. She cried at the station, briefly, with the dignity of a woman who considers tears acceptable in private but not in public. Then she straightened up, said she would come again in the fall, and Lavinia said good, and that was that. The mine ran well that year. Better than well. Royce renegotiated the supply contracts himself, through a company Dolores vouched for personally, and the yield was the highest since the original strike. Several neighboring mine owners began asking Royce's opinion on their own contract terms, which he started giving with Lavinia sitting beside him at the table. "You're the one who actually knows," he said once, after a meeting where she'd spotted a problem in the first paragraph of a proposed agreement that 3 lawyers had missed entirely. "You know the mind," she said. "I know the paper. Together we know enough." Ned turned 11 that fall. They celebrated with a cake Lavinia burned on one side and they ate anyway, and with a set of surveying tools Royce had ordered from Denver because Ned had decided he wanted to learn to read the land the way his father read people, methodically, with attention to what it was actually saying, rather than what you expected to find. That night, after the candles were out and the house was settling into quiet, Royce and Lavinia sat on the porch in the cold dark, their shoulders touching. "Do you ever think about Virginia?" he asked. "Sometimes." She considered. "I think about the person I was there. How small I'd let myself become, trying to fit into a space that wasn't made for me." She looked at the mountain. "I don't think about going back." "No? I have things here that I never had there." She turned to look at him. "Work that matters. A child who trusts me. A husband who sees me." She said it simply, without performance. "That's everything I didn't know I was looking for." Royce pulled her closer. She leaned into him, listening to the stamp mills, the rhythm of silver being beaten out of rock high on the hillside above them. "I was thinking," he said, "about what you told me when you first arrived, that whoever wrote that advertisement wasn't you." "It wasn't." "No, but you answered it anyway." He rested his chin on top of her head. "You answered something that was never meant for you and made it into something it was never supposed to be. That's the most you thing I can imagine." She laughed. The way she'd learned to laugh out here, without calculating whether it was appropriate. "My brother-in-law tried to make me disappear," she said. "He sent me to the edge of the country to a stranger in a silver mine, and instead of disappearing I built something," Royce said. "Built something." She looked out at the dark valley below Pioche, at the lights of the town, at the life that had assembled itself out of a telegram and a set of borrowed ledgers and the particular kind of stubbornness that had always been her most inconvenient quality and had turned out, here, to be her best one. She had not come to Nevada to become someone else. She had come to stop pretending to be someone smaller than herself. And this land, this hard, loud, unforgiving land, had done what no parlor in Virginia ever had. It had given her room. The woman they'd sent away to solve a problem became the woman who solved everyone else's. Not by becoming easier, by finally insisting on being exactly as difficult as she'd always been, and finding at last a place that called it strength.